Hello, SMU TESOL students in the methodology course, and welcome to Classroom Interactions, a supplemental video which will provide additional support for some of your classroom interactions, which can be a little bit tricky when you first learn about them. Okay, so what you're looking at now is the Fall 2019 official classroom interactions sheet, including all of your MIC techniques, scaffolding, including material, verbal, nonverbal, and procedural scaffolding techniques, and feedback, which includes corrective feedback and positive reinforcement. Additionally, we have this kind of meta category, or even a larger umbrella category of eliciting, which covers many of the techniques in the scaffolding categories, and it's fundamental for communicative language teaching, so we include it here. Alright, so jumping right into our making input comprehensible techniques. Before I get into each individual technique, I just wanted to make crystal clear that MICs, their main purpose for existence is to make input comprehensible. And for that reason, the doer of the action is the teacher. So when we're talking about MICs, we're talking about the teacher doing something specifically to make that new language, or make that reading, or make the listening, or make her own teacher talk more comprehensible. So some of the things that we could talk about when we say making input comprehensible, how do we do that? Well, we could preview upcoming content. So instead of jumping right in, we make input more comprehensible by activating schemata, right? In other words, getting students to speak about what they already know about that topic. Introducing the lesson or activity is often helpful, rather than jumping into that new lesson, jumping into that new topic or activity. Let them know what they're going to do to make the input more comprehensible. Using visuals. Now this can be tricky for our students because they say, oh, wait a second, Dave, am I using visuals, MIC visuals, or am I doing MS, material scaffolding, using visuals? Well, remember that it could be the same material. The difference is, what are you doing with that material? If you are using that material to make new language or make input comprehensible, in other words, to help them understand new things, then that's MIC visual. Now, if you're using a visual to encourage them to speak to each other, or using that same visual to encourage them to speak to you or to interact, then that could be scaffolding, material scaffolding. Okay? If you can imagine, for example, imagine a picture of an elephant. Close your eyes and imagine that picture of an elephant. Okay, you're showing your students this picture of an elephant. Now, if you're doing it to help them understand the new language, elephant, then it's MIC visuals. But if you're showing them this picture and it's not new language, it's just, hey, describe to your partners, what do you see in the picture? Do you like elephants? What's your experience with elephants? Talk to your partners about elephants. Let's make a dialogue with this elephant. Then we're talking about material scaffolding. Okay, so it all comes down to what your learners are doing, what you are using that visual for. Okay. Those visuals could be written clues. So, for example, a kind of dual coding. You write a couple words on the whiteboard to help them understand. You could be using pictures or other images, as we spoke about. Dual coding. The reason dual coding is an MIC is because dual coding is most frequently used with instructions for activities. For example, you have an activity where students work in pairs, you might write on the whiteboard WB. You might write PW for pair work as a little, it's kind of keyword instructions as part of your dual coding. Okay, so remember also when we're talking about dual coding, you've written it on the whiteboard typically, you're talking about it, you're giving those verbal instructions, and you're also indicating with your hand, with your fingers, you're pointing, as our little guy is doing here, pointing at the instructions on the whiteboard, because otherwise all these students are looking just at you and they're not taking advantage of the dual coding on the whiteboard. Okay. Nonverbal cues such as gestures. Again, when we're trying to make input comprehensible by using our gestures, for example, this guy is talking about fishing and he's using a fishing gesture that to make that input comprehensible, then that would be MIC visuals, using gestures. Using realia. Now, keep in mind, realia is just what it looks like. It's something real. Again, going back to our elephant example, if the new language for the learners is elephant, and you bring into class a baby elephant, then that is realia. And typically, we couldn't do that sort of thing in our classrooms for obvious reason, but if you bring kind of a stuffed animal, elephant, that's close enough to be considered realia, right? So elephant, this is an elephant, etc. Often realia tends to be things that are what we call authentic texts. For example, I would take a newspaper from my father's table and give it to my learners. It's authentic text. It could be a kind of realia as well. Okay. Or something like movie tickets. Okay. So we want to talk about movie tickets in class, so I bring actual movie tickets into the classroom. That's realia. Okay. The teacher rephrases key language. Rephrases using smaller, meaningful chunks. So I can do that with this very title. Okay. The teacher rephrases key language, says key language in a different way. Smaller, meaningful chunks. Meaningful chunks. Meaningful chunks. Okay, so when you're using meaningful chunks, that means not the whole utterance, but just a piece of it. Using previously known language. So remember, the key to rephrasing is we don't want to just go from easy language to more difficult language. You want to go from new language to simpler language that they already know. Okay, so you'll see many examples of that in the classroom. Using simpler words or structures. Okay, it's very closely related to previously known language. The teacher elaborates on language. This is an MIC technique that I would warn SMU students about. Elaborating is important. We need to let them know kind of more details and more information to help them understand, but be very careful with elaborate, because if you provide too many examples, if you say too much, then you can overload them with your teacher talk, and while you're trying to help them, you might confuse them even more. So use this one with caution. But it does include describing things. But be careful, because describing is a sister to explaining, and explaining is not a good word where we come from, because you can explain too much. Okay? Providing examples. Rather than keeping it as something abstract, a category like elaborate, you want to provide examples. So today we're going to talk about mammals. Mammals, MIC repeat. Such as cats and dogs, monkeys and rats. I've provided some examples, but I want to be careful because elaborating can be too much input, too much teacher talk. Asking guiding questions. So guiding questions could be under elaborate sometimes, right? So it's like providing a little bit more scaffolding. It's like providing asking them to elaborate a little bit for themselves in a way. So asking guiding questions. Today we're talking about mammals. Mammals are a type of animal such as reptile. What are some other types of animals? Ask your partners.